Recording in progress. All right, we're good to go. So if you're just joining us as you're rolling in here, we'd love to do it where if you want to just put out where you're from, that's always helpful. And I'm from Sacramento, or I'm calling from Sacramento. I'm from all kinds of cool places, but that's just where I am today. Brendon, looks like you're in your offices.
Yep.
Soho.
Yeah, we're based in New York and Soho.
Nice. It's a very I feel like a cool fashionista when I go there.
Yeah,
Also
there's
the
there's
Go
there's
ahead.
a couple spots in the neighborhood too that we run into a few famous people. It's a fun little neighborhood for us. We
And
saw
they're
Erlich Bachman from Silicon Valley 2 weeks ago, Brad Gerstner 4 weeks ago, and 11 from Stranger Things. I don't know these people's real names, but that's who. Yeah.
the light behind you is giving you like perfect little horns,
Oh yeah.
which is the fun.
There now it's a
Just the
halo. And now
Yeah,
it's
there you go. There you go. It's all about branding. It's all about messaging.
exactly.
That's so funny. Uh, that's cool. Erlich Bachman, you should have him come in and pitch, and just be on calls with you. I'm
Oh
sure he
yeah.
loves that.
Yep. Aviato is the angel.
That's so funny. I wonder if people are walking around being like, "That's the Athena guy." Oh my God.
Going viral on Twitter.
Yeah. That's cool. Okay, we'll get started. We say we're gonna get started at 3. We can go ahead and jump in a little bit here. But yeah, so Brendon, thank you for joining us. Everybody, hello. I'm Graham. I'm the DevRel here at CopilotKit. And we love to do these with people that we think are going to be valuable for you. So if you're building an agent in the space, it's always nice to hear from people who are at the edge. And so, Brendon, I don't know if you know this, but almost every infrastructure provider sort of talks about you as like, oh, Athena Intelligence, they're the ones that are like really at the edge. They're always, we release a feature and within days they have put it in production or done something with it that nobody's expecting. And so I think it's we're really glad that you're joining us because a lot of people can learn from how you guys are using this. So I know that's all Ben, but I'm sure you're part of it too. But yeah, so we're really grateful you're here and thanks for joining us.
I appreciate it. We couldn't do it without all those companies out there for us to make the business work.
Well, it's great. It's fun to see, and it's cool to whenever it's great to see your product sort of get pulled out and used in different ways. We could talk about how you're doing uh, interesting stuff people aren't doing a little bit later, but I wanted to just sort of jump into what we're going to talk about today. So a little bit of background on you, I think would be great. We want to talk about Athena itself, like what it actually does, and then I want to go into like this whole from SaaS to agentic application. I know you talk about it as like people hiring agents. So I'd love to see how you see that landscape. I would love to learn a little bit more about how you're actually using that infrastructure, like we talked about, and then just like how the markets are using products like this, and then what the future for Athena looks like, and then we can open it up to questions from the audience. How's that sound?
Great. Looking forward to it.
Cool. That sounds great. All right. Well, let's jump into it. I mean, Brendon, how about do you want to just tell us a little bit about you and sort of what brought you to this product?
Yeah. So originally from the Midwest, school out in Iowa. I always like to tell one of my first ML projects was listening for when pigs were being laid on by their mother in farrowing cages, applying a small shock to the mother to stand up and helping save 1 in 9 pigs. So that was kind of the upbringing in ML that I had was in the Midwest. So slightly different from some of the coastal use cases, but exciting nonetheless. From there, most of my professional career was with Palantir. I held TS clearance with them in the Middle East and in DC. Learned a lot about hard to work with customers, hard to work with systems, real world problems, and really enjoyed the work. Fast forward a bit of time with Scale AI and Praxis, kind of getting back into the LLM side of the house, training and actually building the infrastructure and systems to make these things work before starting Athena.
Very cool. I love the life and death of application of ML. In ways that most people don't realize. We're all doing fun stuff, and you're out here saving baby pigs. So I love it. So, maybe you want to talk, you talked about what you did before Athena, but maybe like where, how did it start and why did you decide that like this was something for you to take on?
Yeah, yeah. So I think one of the early points that convinced us to start the company was the problem set that we saw at Palantir was a lot of these Fortune 500 and government organizations had the problems, but didn't have the hiring profiles to actually get and retain like really great talent. Your Anheuser Busches and your Walmarts, the world struggled to really get really great talent to join. So they kind of outsourced that to folks like Palantir to help come in, act as both a product and a service organization. So as the kind of early insights of what the LLM market could look like, there was a hypothesis that the agents, which we're a big fan of today and very well known, would be able to kind of suffice as that entry level technical employee. They don't quit, they don't take off Fridays, and they're 24/7. A lot of the work that we did at Palantir at the time was trying to understand the business context, ingest that as a data feed, and then build tools for humans to effectively use that. That last kind of bucket, we've hypothesized you could probably give that to a system too. And then that entire layer is offloaded onto a third party software vendor like ourselves. So we, early days, about 3 years ago, started with that thesis. We say we skated to where the puck was going. We didn't try to build a system which did really good autocomplete and then go and sell it, did really good text completion or code generation and then try to sell it. We kind of kept building towards what we hoped would be like an agentic model in terms of quality and reasoning. And then over the last probably 6 months, roughly a year, that is like finally possible. So we didn't invest much into that modeling layer in the early days, and focus primarily on the tooling and all the different workflows that a human and an agent would have to do together. And now it's here.
That's so cool. That's like the skating to where the puck is going, I think is so important because so many people chase whatever the current narrative is. And I think that's probably why you've been so successful and why you're so good at using this infrastructure is that you've have a clear vision and you're just trying to, bend the world to your view, which is the right way to do it.
Yeah.
Um you talked about you talked about it as sort of like an artificial employee. So how do you think about that difference? And how do you think about how letting uh, agents go do what they're great at and letting humans do what they're great at and then, building that interface for them to work together?
Yeah. I almost always try to remove like the differences. Well, what we said about a year ago was to all of our customers, we want to be a remote hire doing entry level work for a Fortune 500. If you fit that mold, you're in our ICP and you're in our product roadmap. The best case scenario, they hire us like a human, they fire us like a human, they train us like a human. We've gone so far as our go-to-market. We find companies that are hiring for these entry-level roles. They are called different things. We sell to financial services, law firms, CPG, retail, defense. Today, we'll actually submit a fake resume for Athena many times as a paralegal, as an Intel analyst, as a supply chain planner. Because if you look at the roles and responsibilities, which I would argue is like our roadmap or our, what you try to get out of that discovery call in SaaS a lot of times. And then you just say, great, if you were to hire this person, which many times they even have the salary, so you even have to have the question on if there's budget, you get past all quite nice. You say, "We're great. What's the hiring? What's the interview process?" We've done like a real human interview before, and got hired. And then the expectation setting too. I think there's a lot of downstream benefits you get from continually falling back on treat us like what a remote hire would get, access to systems, training, and some expectation management. You're not expecting the fresh new grad to do everything autonomously day one. There's a ramp up period. There's a period where you're checking their work, where you're giving them feedback, where they're not supposed to participate on the big customer call, and a separate 3 months later where they should be on the customer call by themselves. So as long as we can keep pace with the remote hire equivalent, we feel like we're in a good roadmap from removing those differences.
Do you you're giving away alpha by talking about the application there as a as a go to market. Um is that something you recommend other people do?
You got to be okay with a couple of recruiters not loving you, but yes, yeah, go for it.
That's from
Like
my
like
old.
at our stage, you have to find a way to be different in this, and if that means we get in the door through a route that we want to be, like if we're saying we're going to be an artificial employee, go be an artificial employee. Do it
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, I wonder if you can get recruiters to just like start reaching out to recruiters the other direction and say like, "Hey, when you get this role, put us up for it and just don't tell them that we're an agent and we'll."
So I'll tell you a quick note. There's a number of large companies that do online job placement. The big two or three of them. One of the largest ones in the industry right now is considering invite Athena button next to like
Hmm,
the job profile. So you have all of these folks that are looking to get additional hours in, and we would kind of just be sitting in there with the rest of them as one of the first artificial folks within that list of you can hire this person for 6 hours of labor to do some technical task.
that's so cool. I love that. So, how do you think that your type, that artificial employee is going to change how the SaaS industry works, right? Because you've got obviously there's a whole process for how people hire SaaS companies, but how do you think it's going to change with this artificial synthetic employee?
Yeah, I think it'll change part of it, but part of it has and should stay the same. Because at the end, a good example is we don't try to compete with tools and SaaS. What we would say is if you have a SaaS tool that you like, we will use that SaaS tool as an artificial employee, right? So I think like a good portion of SaaS should continue to be a system of record, which is very focused on an opinionation in the vertical industry to say, hey, this is the best procurement SaaS tool for long haul trucking. Great. Buy that tool and then give that to your human and artificial agents. There's a separate body of companies like we're probably still considered SaaS that are like building these agents that would be using those tools. So I think like we would definitely see a split. Maybe to
Hmm,
answer a bit more directly, we're going to probably be paid in a way that's a bit more commensurate with value. I think for the
hmm.
first time ever, we live in a world where if you can do the end-to-end workflow, you should be able to measure the ROI and you should be paid accordingly. So removing this credit system of how many compute hours, left, right, center that you had this month, or where butts and seats users per month, moving more and more to like a value-based cost structure.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I know one thing you've spoken a lot about, or at least I've heard you speak about it, is this idea of repeatable workflows where, workflow gets built and then the sort of the human can maybe harden that workflow and then instead of having to define the work each time for the agent, they can just say like, hey, go do that workflow for this or that. I think that's something that there's a lot of talk right now about reducing compute cost in the industry. So like people build these agents, the agents do the same work over and over again, and they're having LLMs make the same decisions over and over again, and that's expensive. So how would you advise someone who's building an agent to sort of think about when you can chunk off a workflow and remove that cost from sending it to the agent, sending it to the LLM?
Yeah, I think I would push back on it's expensive.
Oh, okay.
I think like if you were to measure it end to end, it would look expensive, but are they baking in the cost of when they harden it, you became traditional RPA? And the issue with traditional RPA was every time you hardened it, something changed, and it was expensive to get that really great engineer or that system to kind of retake that over as an LLM workflow. Unsure if that actually holds in this new environment, but to date, when we get a really reproducible workflow, we keep it as is. We eat that cost as long as that cost is coming down 10x every 6 months. We're not seeing that issue at enterprise and consumer. They probably face a different set of agentic pricing decisions, but we don't see
Mm,
latency and cost as like our highest requirements.
got it. Yeah, that makes sense. I can see that. Um, so then I guess moving on to like the infrastructure, do you want to sort of talk about the how you separate out the platform versus Athena, right? Because Athena is the artificial hire, but then you have the platform itself, and maybe talk about those two differences there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in a perfect world, we never would have built the platform, right? Like you go straight to the agent, be an artificial human that can use anything. 3 years ago, it's very much an impossibility. And I think the stepping stones of us owning our own platform, which we call Olympus, Athena sits on Olympus, um, allows us to constrain an environment the same way that you would build a system and have a sandbox in which things are operating. That sandbox has to be useful. So in practice, we built almost like a big mission control center that a human can log in and do work without any AI tooling. Think of it as just a really nice interface for spreadsheets, email, documents, Jupyter notebooks, browsing the internet, all the kind of traditional things an entry-level knowledge worker would do. Now, as the user's using this, there's obviously telemetry that allows us to kind of learn the workflow, and then separate from the workflow, learn the methods to actually, make edits, updates to these types of tools. Great examples like a spreadsheet. The way that you go from blank spreadsheet to a finished product isn't an LLM just generating the entire spreadsheet. It's like a kind of an iteration, which there's not a ton of training data to back, but us being able to actually own that interface allows us to kind of apply one level of additional configuration or even visibility into it.
Got it. That makes sense. And um Yuli had a question about, are you training Athena on the data from Olympus?
Not in the word training that you're probably referring to, like a fine tune. We do not fine tune on the Olympus telemetry. What we do is we look at the issues that were faced from the agent, and then we look at the way that users are using the tool, and then we're baking in higher functional tools. So instead of a tool that writes letter into cell, a tool that maybe writes an entire section with formulas. So we're taking the learnings, but we're not directly training in this environment. The short answer, I think, is the cost and the benefit of the fine tune for our business. We haven't seen any of it. We've tried to do a few of them, and they haven't really panned out.
Okay, that makes sense. And then I think a lot of enterprises seem very skittish about this idea of sending their data off, right?
Yep.
It's probably for good reason, right? You don't want to lose your edge if data is all that matters anymore. So how do you handle that flexibility of being able to like deploy it inside of a client's cloud, and maybe what's the breakdown in difference there when you're seeing
Yeah.
people want this or being willing to just let it be on your agent?
Yeah, this was probably the least fun thing about the first 2 years of our business is we committed to not using services that can't go on-prem in air gap networks. So that's no Lambda functions, no fancy API from the latest YC company that really moves the needle, because we wanted to be able to, from day one, deploy into all three private clouds as well as on-prem networks. We're deployed today in AWS GovCloud for this reason alone, is because we're able to basically bake this thing into our customers' environments. It's now probably one of our best selling mechanisms, being able to walk into a Fortune 500 and say, depending on what's required from your IT and compliance, we're likely going to be able to support it in ways that I think a lot of other companies are still building for a public cloud, or are able to go onto private cloud, but require a ton of third-party services. This is especially prevalent in industries we serve: law, finance, defense. And over time, I think we're going to see more and more of it. People are roughly kind of noticing a return back to owning their own clouds, having more of their systems underneath lock and key. As these types of systems proliferate, and any cyber issues that happen, I think we're going to see more and more demand for folks to be on environments without tons of third-party processors on top of it.
Yeah, the great bundling and unbundling is the only truth in software and technology, right? So we're
Right.
we're
Yeah.
now unbundling again. I've heard some people talk about LLMs as a return to terminals borrowing from mainframes, right? Like you're just ChatGPT is just a terminal to the LLM mainframe. which is kind of
Yeah.
a funny way to think about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of them, I think of a lot of these as like abstractions. Like we have to build an abstraction for a human to be useful, then you have to build one for an LLM to be useful, and then between the two, you have to build another abstraction. And as these kind of like technologies adjust and evolve, you kind of sit there and ask yourself, wait, why did we have this like translation layer? Couldn't we skip that? So I think one that I hear a lot is like, will SQL be around in 10, 15 years? Because wasn't that just a little abstraction for us humans to kind of get into big data? We're not sure, but it's fun to like think about these.
Yeah, I mean, English is just the latest programming language, right? So yeah, it's
Exactly.
you can still use the low level stuff. Nathan had a question about CopilotKit and sort of how you're using that in the stack. You told me something when I was at your office that I think was really interesting about how you're pulling it into situations where it's not. So maybe talk about how you're using it traditionally, and then be interested to hear ways that you're extending it that even we may not have
Uh,
realized was possible yet.
yeah. So I think it's helpful to think about like we were dying for CopilotKit before we had found it. And we didn't know we needed a CopilotKit. We just knew like what the pain point was, which is, we rewind the clock 2, 3 years. We had these systems that could generate text, that could autocomplete, that had nice RAG systems. And then this tool calling thing started to become possible. And most of that was happening on the back end just because of the way that these systems kind of unfolded. But very quickly, you wanted to show the users what was happening. So a lot of times we found that, very, very common today. You build trust by explaining yourself as a person or showing someone your work. Great. If that's the way that humans build trust, we should probably have a similar system. So you'd want to show your work. So you have these basically systems that are operating and you want to show the logs. Another way to show your work is to just do it in front of them. So instead of showing the answer, walk through how you got to the answer visually. So I think over time, more and more, we wanted to show the user what was happening. So instead of just searching for something and spitting out the 10 results, you would actually type in the user's search bar, filter in front of the user, open their calendar, filter the date range, and see the results, scroll through the results and click it. It's a very different experience visually, but it's the same set of technology under the hood. There wasn't a great way for us to do that. And we had built this Frankenstein system before we found CopilotKit. And that was kind of the connective tissue between what these things were really good at: data, context, function calling, and then actually like what the user is experiencing, which is a UI traditionally. It's not, a Jupyter notebook or some terminal, which people are running their quick commands in. So very quickly, most of the work was, how do you continue to visually show the user either what's happening in real time or what has happened? And there's a lot of primitives that kind of fall under this bucket when we think about runtimes, model swapping, in kind of like different, we call them clients, which I think is the last one you asked about, which is how we're extending CopilotKit. So today, the major client is web as a client. But there's a lot of mediums in which we expect our users to work with a remote hire. Those mediums are phone, SMS, email, Slack, and Zoom meetings. So the call we're on right now, today, we have the agent joining Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Meet. It joins, it connects, it participates, it does function calling on the Zoom meeting. And kind of like under the hood, you'd want the same kind of brain and function calling systems that you wrote to not have to be voice specific, video specific, Zoom specific, Slack specific, email specific. And that's how we were building our systems early days, was each one had its own system under the hood. And CopilotKit and a few other tools allowed us to start kind of combining those into an architecture, which we could write a tool once and you could use it from the front end, from the phone call, from a Zoom meeting. And that's how we've been extending CopilotKit, is to work in all of these other mediums.
That's really cool. It's fun to when you hear about that's probably the best part about being an open source project is you could see people expanding it in ways that you didn't realize, and also get to just sort of use that as a helpful guide stick of where maybe we should start pushing the product in some ways. Um, I think. Do you want to talk about a little bit of, you talked a lot about who the industries you've worked with are. Are there any like individual success stories that you think are exciting, or illustrative of like why more people should be building these types of agents and yeah.
Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about our account with Anheuser-Busch. So they have a massive amount of data. This is structured, unstructured. On a monthly basis, they're releasing new products. So, we're all familiar with the Coronas and the Stellas, but they're doing these things called product innovations across the world. So, how do we release a new seltzer in Brazil and use the learnings that we had in Brussels for a completely different product, but has a similar packaging? And this is a traditional kind of data science or data analyst problem where you're calling up a bunch of people at different regions, collecting reports. There's years of PowerPoints, of presentations, call recordings, emails, and then there's the more traditional BI tooling. There's a SQL database of all of the sales. Under the hood, there's people basically doing a lot of these report generation and sifting through data to answer business questions. All of that is a perfect LLM use case for us. And we've tied together all of the kind of tools. I think of it almost like an octopus, like a tentacle into each part of the different workflows, data, context, or pieces of the business. And now, as of today, they're able to come into Athena, ask effectively any question on top of what they know exists within their corpus, and then have a first draft and an answer with citations available for them. And then that's deployed across a number of different regions available over an email. So you can email Athena, you can call it, you can invite it to a Zoom meeting, and it acts as like a true full-time hire.
It's so cool. I love the idea. Really, I'm just curious about seltzer in Brazil versus Brussels. Like, what's the different nuances there? But that's private proprietary customer information. I think before we jump into the Q&A, and if anyone's got questions, feel free to either start firing them off in the chat or just like get ready to ask them. I'm interested in where you think this is all going, right? Like, obviously, a remote hire. Like, I don't know what percent. Do you think that like all entry level roles will be agents at some point, and then how do users get that entry level experience? And I don't know. I'm just curious what you think the next 5 years is going to look like.
Yeah, I think it'll look very similar to what it looks like now. When a new hire gets hired, like a human, they use an insane amount of tooling. That tooling allows them to just be way more effective. And I would continue to argue that the parts about the human experience that people enjoy, even at the entry level, is not, pulling an all-nighter because your, investment banking boss is asking you to fix a PowerPoint deck and create a new financial model. That's the kind of stuff that we want to be eating and taking off the plate. So that way, people are coming in and they're learning, the soft skills about negotiating at the table, flying to a country to really understand what about that product innovation is working on the ground with the innovation team in Brazil or in Brussels, and not sitting remotely in a basement because that's where they have to be doing their data analyst and entry roles. So I think in the long term, we're just going to see more and more of the agents eating parts of the stack that are just not interesting to people, and people want to work with other people, and that should be more prevalent. The fact that we live in a 50-year blip where most of our careers are spent behind a screen sucks. We should be spent out in the world working with other folks. Like, that's what work should be like. It shouldn't be spent behind a computer.
I love that. I love the idea that you're not killing work, you're killing soul sucking work. And so it's like anytime, this shouldn't be a meeting, this could be an email, it shouldn't be a presentation, it should just be a conversation with
Yeah.
Athena, right? Yeah.
And I mean, like, we're biased because we think the remote work should be just handled by agents a lot of times, but we're an in-person team, 5-6 days a week here in New York, and that's the fun part about our job, is like being in person with folks, and we want more and more of that.
Yeah. And you live in a great neighborhood with great restaurants around. So it's yeah, I got to eat after I left last week. It was awesome. Cool. Well, I want to open it up to questions. And so I've asked a lot of questions. So if anybody's got a question in the chat, feel free to jump in. Oh, so you talked a little bit about pricing, but Yuli wanted to know how you think about pricing and capturing the value of SaaS versus like headcount budgets. Maybe you just go a little bit in deeper about how you talked about the the value capture and creation. Like, do companies really have a good handle on the cost of each individual thing? I guess it's curious how you think about that.
Yeah. So I think in the last 6 months, we've gotten the highest demand from law. Uh, and there's two types of firms I think that we've come across. One is, cost efficiency. They see parts of their business, typically the transactional parts of law, the back office work, which they want to offload to technology. And then we also see revenue generating. So we see a number of folks that are saying, we can offer more services to our clients and do better work because, we're a firm that has a really strong set of lawyers. And if we can get those lawyers to bill more hours because the hours they can't bill are not spent on anything else, because we're offloading that to these types of systems, is actually a revenue generating function for them. So, we've seen this, each company has a thesis. I don't think have seen like any hard and fast rule, which is, probably some of the struggles that folks are seeing while going to market with AI tools is you can't come in and say, we want to be an AI agent. People are sometimes freaked out by that, which is part of the reason we actually, ran with Athena Olympus. Depending on where we think they are on the spectrum of wanting to buy a tool to wanting to buy an AI agent, we walk in and say, you're buying Olympus. It's a set of tools that all of your organization should be on. And then separate groups, really like this idea of offloading, parts of labor. And then we kind of lead with, Athena, which is a true artificial employee that just so happens to use this thing called Olympus.
Yeah, interested to hear about how you're using LangChain and Tavili.
Yeah, yeah. I'll start with Tabili. We just saw them recently. They're spent a lot of time in New York as well. Search, super hard problem. Most companies that we work with today, we work with because they are sitting at the edge with us. I've seen a lot of folks who said, why aren't you using this model? The score on this ranking is 2x higher here. It's because I think the iteration we've seen from folks like LangChain, Tavili, and CopilotKit are why we go with them. It's not always, just the best model performance by some accuracy metric, but Tavili specifically, we work with them because we find a problem within the search domain. We refer back to them. The way we're using them today is a number of research workflows. We work with corp dev teams at large Fortune 100 companies. Corp dev is a very big research task. Hey, we're meeting with CopilotKit next Tuesday. Get me their org structure, recent news, investment opportunity, partnership relative to our company, brief, an email, as well as a follow-up. And then LangChain, talk briefly about them is, we've from early days felt that model swapping was something we really wanted. They laid a really solid roadmap early days. We got on that roadmap with them, and we've been extremely, extremely appreciative of like all the work they've done since then too. So everything from LangServe to LangGraph platform, all the way through to just some of the architecture decisions that they've made, so that way our team can focus on the business problems. We always like to say that we go to SF to find the best tools and infrastructure, and then we run back to New York and we deploy to all of our customers. And that kind of mold of really great tech is coming out of San Francisco, and we find ourselves perusing and finding great talent like you guys as well to do that.
And I've never thought of the United States as just a company, and the engineering team is in San Francisco, and the sales team is in New York, and it's a
Our
funny way to
customers
look
are in
at
the
it.
Midwest.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
So,
before you know it, it'll be every. I mean, who's the company? John Deere is like surprisingly tech forward, and nobody realizes it. Like they've got an enormous engineering team, and
yeah,
people
yeah.
sleep on the Midwest.
My whole school, I was electrical engineer at Iowa State, so I can tell you probably 50% of my electrical engineering graduating class is now John Deere. So really, really strong work. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they do great stuff. Um, do you think there was this idea? There's a question from Tyler about, do you think applications are going to be all applications are going to be agent native? Like, because you mentioned briefly that you think, agents are just using some SaaS applications, but like where is that line going to fall in the future when you go to set out to build a net new enterprise app? Where who's going to be building a SaaS app for agents to use, or who's going to be building a SaaS app for users?
Probably gonna be similar to the gig economy, maybe for software, right? Like WordPress dropped, and then a whole bucket of WordPress developers, and there are massive businesses just being WordPress developers. Very verticalized person on a problem. I feel like the agent space probably will have something similar, which is third party individuals around the world being the Salesforce agent that just sits on top of Salesforce. They'll probably release their own as well, but because of computer use, you really can't say no to someone just building an agent on top of software nowadays. I'll probably get dinged for saying this, but we are currently logging into proprietary systems with browser base as a kind of another tool set we use, and a bunch of other agentic workflows. And a lot of times these companies they don't know that Athena is using the login that the company has for various work, and that's probably going to proliferate.
We're finally going to get salespeople to use Salesforce. That's amazing. It's going to
Yeah.
actually happen now. It's always the best salespeople that don't want to do it. Um, Can you speak to any sort of open models that people are using, like for people that really don't want to leverage someone else? Like you've talked about people going fully on-prem with their own clouds. Like, what's the solution there? Because obviously, Azure cloud is the sort of choice du jour for a lot of companies that are comfortable with it, but the ones that really aren't, what are they doing? What models are they choosing?
Llama 3 all the way. Yeah.
Hmm.
Like yeah, to your point, every business has a reason why they blacklist or whitelist models. We are not in the business of convincing them. That's their doing, especially in the government, right? Like for tons of reasons that I don't even understand. A company will decide not to want to use a model provider. Maybe a model provider, but not the model, right? Because if you think about, you can get OpenAI from Azure or from OpenAI directly. You can get Claude from AWS or from Anthropic directly. So I think moving up the stack from just like what is the model that you're using, but where are you hitting an endpoint? And obviously for Llama 3, you remove the need to have a third-party endpoint completely by having that on-prem capability. Some work we've done in the background is we've negotiated zero data retention policies with 25 models on 8 model providers. So that way it hits the API, it never gets saved. But to your point, like there's still a class of companies that require it to be never leaving an enclave, which
Hmm.
we should support. The decision they have to get there, we care less about.
Yeah, I think the really interesting theme that I'm coming across here is that a lot of people think like this is changing everything, and you're sort of saying it's actually changing nothing. It's just a different interface. It's really everything else stays the same, and so people are maybe overcomplicating it when they think about how the paradigm is shifting.
Yeah, it's everything's completely different, but it's all completely the same. If you just flip the script and saying that remote hire that never turns on their camera, it's basically that. A little bit tougher to talk to sometimes, but it'll get better.
Okay, so do you have anybody who's using Athena Intelligence? They bought an enterprise plan and they're just going out and applying and getting 50 jobs. You have one person working for 100 companies using Athena in the background.
Maybe a different question is it not working at your company right now and you don't know it? Who
Yeah,
knows?
exactly, exactly. It's just on Slack taking feedback from people and going and doing the work. That's funny.
Yeah.
Um, so Yuli wanted to know. Oh wait, Alec was interested about financial services. What are the use cases or case studies that you've got in that space?
Definitely research based. So they have like probably one of the highest tiers of data security. You can give them every piece of documentation, and they're still going to take 2 years to give you access to the systems that you'd require to be a full agent, which we're happy to, take that 2-year sales cycle, implementation cycle with them. So early days with most of those customers, we get in the door with a workflow that requires no access to systems. There was actually one firm out in Europe that couldn't access our website because we're a .ai website. So our first conversation, we're like sending them the material, and they're like, "We can't even look at your material." So we've since switched to .com, which was a very fun experience switching domains at this stage.
Yeah.
But yeah, so V0 with most of our financial services is a research workflow, pulling down, third-party information, going to websites, figuring out what these organizations are doing in preparatory work. And then from there, there's a lot of like due diligence workflows, deal room analysis. Hey, you're, looking at a company or at a particular deal or contract, and you want an LLM to take a first pass at it. And then as we're looking into 2025, we've got some like early demonstrations of drafting material. So you have a Excel financial model, you have a email which you've drafted, you have a Word doc you've drafted, and you want the system to take an additional pass at a net new piece of material, leveraging other material in the same way that you have a way that you talk to customers, a way that you build financial models. You want the LLM to adhere to that rather than to invent an entirely different approach. I think that's one thing most folks may experience is that when you show this, generate me this massive financial forecast, and it generates the whole thing live. As an engineer, you're like, that was crazy. It just did this whole forecast in Excel for me live. If you talk to most folks, no one's really building a financial model from scratch more than like once, a couple times a year. They're all taking a financial model that the entire company has like vetted and said, we agree with these assumptions, this approach, even the formatting. We prefer the formatting. So how can you be assistive in how the business is already thinking about a problem rather than, hey, I can draft you a fresh material. That's typically not actually the entry level role.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I worked for a large company, and they just gave me a pro forma spreadsheet, and they're like, just type in these numbers and you can, and I was entry level at the time. And so I wasn't generating a new model. I was just filling it out. And this Athena could have just done my work for me and said, go get all the existing properties on the market, plug them into this model, tell me which ones to send an offer to. So
It's funny because it's like for you, it's easier to do that than a fresh model. It's actually, I think, would argue harder for models to assist in the solution that's kind of pretty ready and actually like adhere to it because they're typically at this stage better at doing a fresh copy, which is why you see, especially in the code generation space, so many tools that we're building. Look at a prompt to website. But still today, no one's experiencing like a full feature from prompt because that's actually adhering to your tech stack rather than an entire website. And
yeah.
maybe the company, someone will tell me in the comments, does that today, and we want to talk to them and use the tool. Yeah.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, who's building, a cursor for spaghetti code, right? Like that can actually
Oh yeah.
understand what's
Yeah.
going on. Rajab had a really interesting, he asked about data privacy and how your user data is being processed within a lawyer's infrastructure, or is it handled externally? And but then the second part of that question was, given varying international laws, how do you think the legal assistant is operating within those different countries' legal frameworks?
Yeah. The second one, I probably won't have a great answer. I'll have to talk to our compliance guy and see how he's doing it. But data privacy, there's different tiers. We have a bring your own cloud, bring your own model policy. The highest tier is maybe what you're referring to is data is being fully processed within the environment. Data is never leaving. That's just like the short and fast of it. The way you do that is storage, application, domain, everything is just within that environment. That's typically a VPC within some type of cluster that the customer sets up. We actually have a couple companies that we work with to make that deployment process simpler. We also have, kind of security posture around that. So that way we can't get access to that data. We can't just push an upgrade whenever we feel. There's like different protocols. I think that we're finding value in being able to offer our customers to say, here's the downtime window. If you want to take an upgrade during that time, great. If not, we have no way to touch your system, even from our team's hands, if they require that. On the international law, every country that we have to deploy into, we do the hard work to figure out what's required, and we adhere to it. HIPAA, I think we're 2 weeks away from finalizing, and we're SOC 2, so we have a couple of the high level ones.
Nice. Yeah, I think when you talked about the sort of net new models versus working within existing business constraints, that was interesting. It looks like Yuli also is interested to hear more about that. Do you have other examples of where it's not cool demos and cool net new stuff that people want, and in fact it's actually like specific business problems?
Yeah. I think today we still haven't figured out some of the like easiest low hanging fruit because it's not sexy. Like I still cannot tell a system to edit a very particular section of a document or an Excel file or a notebook and really make sure it stays within those bounds. The only company I've seen that does this well is Cursor, but it's a simplified problem set because it's text, so it's a 1D piece of material, and it's one file. Whereas a Word doc has kind of multiple layers in it, image, text. Some of them are mixed around, and same with Excel. There's what the user sees. There's the value. So a classic example is a million. If there's a cell with the word a million in it, you would see a $sign, a million with commas. The value that's in there is a million. The formula that could be underneath that is referencing a bunch of cells. And that's a really hard problem to figure out. Well, the user sees this, the model can see all three. What should be like the adjustment to be made? So I think we've noticed this on most of like the asset types we work with. There's just like a really hard problem of how do you make sure you're only working on a particular set of material, and then make that very clear to the user what you're doing.
Yeah. It's that classic problem of asking an engineer to do something and then following it explicitly and not getting the intent of what you want. There's a really funny video of this guy had his kids write him instructions on how to make a peanut butter sandwich. And the first thing was like, put the knife in the peanut butter. And so he drops it handle first into the bucket. And so that's probably a lot of what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been super fascinating. I think a lot of people are going to get a ton of value from just hearing what you're seeing at the front lines. Maybe just one last question, looking forward, which is, if you weren't building Athena intelligence today, and somebody else was building Athena and they were crushing it, uh, what opportunities do you see in the marketplace that somebody could be going after right now if they wanted to build an agent and make a market?
I can join Athena. Let's think. I think there's been a lot of work on the tooling side. I think there's a lot of people that probably say there's a lot more work to be done there. I think there's not been a ton on what we call like data representations. So there's like integration tools that take, SharePoint, Google Drive, Outlook, and put it into a database. Useful, it's LLM ready with a little bit more work. There's like a second body of work, which I would call like representing that data in a way to make it more useful. So this is things like memory management systems, tagging systems, ontologies. This like these pipelines, which are traditionally ETL pipelines, which work well on structured data. What is the equivalent? Like knowledge graphs are like a interesting tool, but I think there's a lot of value in being able to offer a service around this to say, hey, we take in your Outlook as a business, and then we give a really great data representation to companies like us. So that way, we can have an Outlook integration, which we do, but that's just the first piece of the puzzle. There's a ton of hard work to represent threads, messages, images, attachments that, we have an opinion on it, but someone else could probably have a really great opinion and then offer that as a service to say, hey, if you want an LLM ready knowledge base for Outlook, that is specific to an industry, which you can add tags and a lot of stitching around. That to me would be a really interesting business.
Okay. And Jean-Philippe sounds like he wants to work with you, but he said you have clients in Europe. Or you have a team there? Are you building a team in Europe?
Yeah, so we have 4 people that are contracting or part-time. Everyone's in person in office. So to keep that policy, we're looking at a London office next year for bringing on a group out there. So knock on wood, Jean, just reach out and you'll be number 5, and that'll push us to open that office.
Nice. This is great. Well, I'm always a fan of giving people their time back. So, and especially you, I know you're really busy. You've got a lot of job applications to fill out.
Yeah.
But yeah, this has been really great. Thank you so much. We're gonna, get this edited, get it up on YouTube, probably share some clips and share it around. But Brenden, thank you so much. Where can people reach out to you? Where can Jean-Philippe apply? How do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, we're athenaintel.com. We're opening up more and more self-serve. So I think it's 2 or 3 questions and you guys can get access. You can find us at team@athenaintel.com as well.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much, Brenden. We really, really appreciate you joining us today.
Absolutely. Good to see you, Graham.
See you.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.